HOA grabbed my road without asking, then every car mysteriously disappeared. I knew the HOA president was a control freak, but when she claimed our road as hers without so much as a warning, that's when things started to get strange. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a petty power move, until the cars started vanishing. Every single car parked on that road, gone without a trace. I watched from my window as the neighborhood went silent. The kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. Who was behind this? And more importantly, why? Hey there, I'm Mark, and welcome to the HOA unit. I live in a small suburban neighborhood, not far from the chaos of city life. I've always kept to myself, but today I'm here to tell you a story that might just change the way you look at your HOA. Where I live, it's all about control. And let me tell you, the HOA never lets you forget it. But this story, it's different. It's about how one small act of defiance set off a chain of events that no one saw coming. Now, let's dive into it. HOA grabbed my road without asking. Then every car mysteriously disappeared. I had seen the president of the HOA, Mrs. Hardy, smile many times before. But this time, something felt off. She was standing in front of my house, staring at the new road sign she had placed without any notice. I could see the smug satisfaction in her eyes, like she had just won some kind of war. But no one else seemed to notice. Until I did. The road, it wasn't just any road. It was the main entrance to our cul-de-sac, the only way in and out of the neighborhood. And now it was officially private property. I mean, how does that even happen? A simple sign, a little change, and just like that, our road was no longer ours. I could feel my blood start to boil. We had never agreed to this. No vote, no community discussion. Mrs. Hardy thought she could get away with it because she held the power, but something told me she wasn't going to be so lucky this time. I paced in front of my window, staring at the new sign, trying to figure out how this could happen. Wasn't it illegal to just take someone's property like that? I thought about calling the other neighbors, but I wasn't sure if they cared. Most of them didn't even notice how the HOA had been slowly taking control of everything. From mailbox height restrictions to lawn color violations, they had a rule for everything. And now they were taking the road? I looked out at the sign again. Private property, HOA members only. The words burned in my mind. It felt like a slap in the face. An insult. I had lived in this neighborhood for over a decade. I had paid my dues, followed every rule, never caused any trouble, and now, out of nowhere, this? I decided to take a walk down to the street, see if anyone else was as upset as I was. I wasn't expecting a parade or anything, but I didn't even see one person. The houses stood still, quiet, like they were afraid to say something. I could feel the tension building in my chest. Was everyone else just okay with this? I passed a few neighbors' houses, and no one was home. It was a Saturday afternoon, so where was everyone? I kept walking, my mind racing with thoughts. What could I do? I thought about the HOA's bylaws, but they were so complicated, I could never keep up. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. This wasn't just about a road anymore. It was about control, and Mrs. Hardy was flexing her muscles. I walked all the way down to the end of the street, where I could see the entrance to the neighborhood. It felt like the entire area had been marked off as theirs. And just when I thought I couldn't get more angry, I saw something strange. A small white car was parked right in front of the new sign. Was it a mistake? Did the person not see the sign? But then, I saw something that made my heart stop. The driver was taking a picture of the sign. A picture. It felt like a violation of some kind, like they were documenting something they weren't supposed to. I looked at the car for a few seconds, trying to understand what was going on. And just like that, the car sped off, leaving me standing there, staring at the sign. The weird thing was, I never saw the car again. The following day, I waited, watching the road from my window. No sign of it. No one seemed to talk about the car either. It was like it had vanished. That's when I realized something. This wasn't just a case of some petty HOA president taking charge. This felt like something much bigger. By the time Sunday rolled around, I couldn't get the image of that car out of my head. What had I witnessed? Who was behind it? And more importantly, why had they taken that picture? Was someone else as upset as I was? And then, it happened. I saw a few cars parked along the street near the new sign. They were parked illegally, right in front of the area Mrs. Hardy claimed was hers. I didn't know who they belonged to, but I had a feeling. They had been parked there intentionally. The whole thing started to feel like a trap, like something was about to happen. But what? The next morning, I was sitting by my window, coffee in hand, when I saw it. The tow trucks. They showed up early, one by one. But what struck me was the cars they were towing. Every single one of the cars parked near that new private road, gone, just like that. Not a single explanation, just towed away. I couldn't believe it. It was happening right before my eyes. But it wasn't just the cars, it was the feeling. Like the entire neighborhood was being swept under the rug, one rule at a time. No questions, no answers, just a slow, quiet takeover. And that's when I knew. Something had to be done. But what if I wasn't the only one who noticed? What if this was just the beginning? I could feel the tension in the air like static electricity, just waiting to snap. The entire neighborhood had been quiet for days after the cars were towed, but you could sense it. The whispers, the uncertainty. The HOA had crossed a line, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. I kept waiting for someone to speak up, to ask questions, but it never happened. People walked around like nothing was wrong. And that's when I realized, maybe no one else saw the danger yet. But I did, and I wasn't going to let it go. I spent the next few days watching. I watched the roads, the signs, and especially Mrs. Hardy. She was walking around like she owned the place, straight-backed, head high, smile painted on her face, acting like everything was normal. But it wasn't normal. Nothing about this situation felt normal. The road had been stolen from us, and now it was only a matter of time before she took something else. I couldn't let it slide. I needed to do something, but what? I started small, really small. You know, sometimes the best way to fight back is to do something that makes them question everything. I went over to the HOA office and found a little loophole in their bylaws. It wasn't much, just a tiny thing about how the road could only be considered private if more than 51% of homeowners agreed. The catch? No one had asked us, and there was no vote. That was the first crack I noticed, and I felt the adrenaline rush through me. I made a few copies of the rulebook, just in case. The next evening, when Mrs. Hardy was walking her dog down the street, I decided to test the waters. I made sure I was visible, standing by my mailbox, flipping through the HOA manual. I could feel her eyes on me as she walked past. There was something in the way she looked at me. It wasn't just the usual, "I'm better than you" look. It was more like she knew exactly what I was up to, like she was already planning her next move. But I didn't back down. I kept flipping through the manual, making sure she could see the bylaws clearly in my hands. The next morning, when I went out to get the mail, there was a letter from the HOA waiting for me. It wasn't a fine. It wasn't a warning. It was a letter telling me I had violated the neighborhood spirit by not being more cooperative. That's when I realized. This wasn't just about the road anymore. This was about control. The letter was signed by Mrs. Hardy. I stared at her signature, a surge of anger bubbling up inside me. She was trying to push me into a corner, but I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. I needed to make sure everyone knew what was really going on. I started making phone calls to neighbors, trying to get a feel for how they felt about the new private road. Most of them said they hadn't even noticed, and the few who did were too scared to speak up. I felt like I was the only one fighting. The more I dug into the HOA's history, the more I found. They had done this kind of thing before, small power grabs here and there. But this was different. Taking a road wasn't just a small violation, it was a statement. It meant they could do whatever they wanted, and no one could stop them. I started to gather information, collecting everything I could on the HOA's past actions. I knew that if I was going to make a move, I needed to be prepared. I started talking to the other homeowners, trying to rally support. But it wasn't easy. Some people were afraid of the HOA, others didn't want to get involved, and some just didn't care. It wasn't until I spoke to Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who had been living on the corner for years, that I felt a spark of hope. She had been there long before the HOA had even existed, and she remembered a time when people actually took care of their neighborhood. "I used to know everyone here," she told me, sitting on her porch, her voice soft but steady. "Now it's just a bunch of strangers, doing what they're told." She wasn't wrong. The HOA had turned our community into a place of fear, where no one felt safe speaking their mind. Mrs. Patterson was the first person to actually agree with me. She told me about the old days, when neighbors would stand up for each other, when things weren't controlled by a bunch of rules and fines. That gave me hope. If I could get enough people on my side, we could challenge the HOA. But the problem was, it wasn't enough to just gather information. I needed to hit them where it hurt, and I knew exactly where to start. I went back to the HOA's office late one night when I knew no one would be around. I made sure I was as quiet as possible, slipping inside without making a sound. I had already copied the bylaws, but now I needed something more, something that would get their attention. I started going through their files, looking for any kind of misstep, any kind of rule they might have broken. And then I found it. An old contract buried deep in the stacks that would change everything. The HOA had illegally altered the original neighborhood agreements years ago, making the road private without consent from the community. It was all right there. Proof that they had been breaking the law from the start. I smiled to myself. This was it. I had what I needed to take them down. Now, all I had to do was get the rest of the neighborhood to listen. But that was going to be the hard part, because the moment they found out what I was planning, the war would officially begin. The days started to blur together after I discovered that contract. I had what I needed, yet nothing felt real. There I was, sitting in my living room staring at the file I had swiped from the HOA office. The proof was clear. The HOA had altered the original neighborhood agreements, and no one, not a single soul, knew about it. It was like they had quietly erased the rules, rewritten them, as if the neighborhood never had any say in the matter. I held that document in my hands, but the weight of it felt heavier than just paper. It felt like power, and I knew it wasn't just mine to keep. I had to act. But how? How could I take this to the other neighbors without them thinking I was some kind of troublemaker? How could I get them to see what I saw? I wasn't about to let the HOA continue with their little games. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what the first step was. The next day I went to the neighborhood park. It was Saturday, and there were a few families enjoying the weather. I tried to act casual as I sat on one of the benches, watching people go by, but I was just waiting for an opportunity. I spotted Mrs. Patterson walking toward me. I smiled, thinking maybe, just maybe, I had a chance to get someone else involved. She sat down next to me, looking over her shoulder, making sure no one else was close. "Mark, you know this can't go on," she whispered, glancing around nervously. I nodded, my heart racing. "I know, but I can't do this alone." "You won't have to," she said. "I'll help you. But you need to be careful. These people—" She stopped herself. I could tell she wanted to say more, but the fear in her voice made it clear. The HOA wasn't just a group of people with power. They were more dangerous than that. We talked for a while about how the HOA had taken control of the neighborhood, how they manipulated rules and forced us into submission. Mrs. Patterson told me stories from before about how it wasn't always like this. But now, she said, everyone just kept their heads down. I could tell she wanted to fight, but the fear of what the HOA would do to her kept her quiet. She had lived here for too long. She had too much to lose. I left the park that day with a sense of unease. I didn't want to do this alone, but the reality was I might have to. I had to be smart about this. Too many eyes were watching. Too many people who weren't ready to fight back. That night, I went back to the file. I started making copies. Hundreds of them. It wasn't just the contract I had found. It was everything. The bylaws, the neighborhood rules, the correspondence. Everything that showed how the HOA had been operating in the shadows. I was going to make sure everyone knew, but I needed to figure out the right way to distribute it. The following day, I started slipping the copies under doors. I made sure to be discreet, never staying in one place for too long. It wasn't about creating a scene. At least, not yet. I just wanted the truth to be out there. Every homeowner deserved to know what was really going on. By the time I finished my rounds, the neighborhood was buzzing. I could hear snippets of conversations as I passed by, voices rising in confusion. Some people seemed to be genuinely shocked. Others were just annoyed. But there were a few who started to ask questions. And that was enough for me. The seed had been planted. I went home and waited. For hours I sat by my window, watching as people came out of their houses, the documents clutched in their hands. Some were talking to each other, some just stared at the pages in disbelief. I didn't know if they would take action, but I knew one thing. They couldn't ignore it anymore. And neither could Mrs. Hardy. But then something happened. I saw her. Mrs. Hardy was white, hulking down the street, her face pale, her jaw tight. She was talking to one of the neighbors. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see her gesturing toward my house. Her eyes narrowed, and just like that, I knew. She had figured out who was behind it, and I had made myself a target. The next few days were strange. Everything seemed quiet. The usual noise of kids playing, lawnmowers running, cars driving by, it all stopped. I went out to check the mail and saw a note taped to my front door. It was from the HOA. It was a warning, a threat. I opened it slowly, reading the words carefully. You are violating HOA rules. We know what you did. If you don't take down the flyers and retract the information, we will take legal action. I didn't flinch. I already knew the rules. They couldn't take my house, my property, my rights, but that didn't mean they wouldn't try. I crumpled the letter in my hand, throwing it into the trash. They were just trying to intimidate me, but it wasn't working. I had come this far. I wasn't going to stop now. The next few days were a blur. I kept making my rounds, talking to the neighbors, trying to get everyone to see what was happening. It wasn't just about the road anymore. It was about the future of the entire neighborhood. If we didn't stop the HOA now, who knows what they'd take next? But there was one thing I knew for sure. I had to make sure I wasn't alone in this fight. Because if I was, I wouldn't stand a chance. It didn't take long for things to escalate. The moment the HOA got wind of what I had done, it was like waking a sleeping giant. At first, they tried to keep it quiet, just a few threatening letters here and there, some passive-aggressive comments from Mrs. Hardy, but then came the fines. The fines were relentless. Every time I parked in my own driveway, I got a new ticket. Every time I trimmed my lawn, it was too high. Every time I touched anything that belonged to me, it felt like I was violating some unwritten rule they had made up overnight. And I knew it was all part of the plan. They were trying to break me, trying to get me to give up, but I wasn't backing down. Not this time. It was a Friday evening when I noticed the first real change. I had just come home from work, and as usual I was expecting the usual scene, cars parked on the street, the faint hum of neighborhood life in the background. But something was off. I stepped out of my car, looking up and down the street, and that's when I saw it. The roads were empty. Not a single car parked on the street. No one was outside. It felt like I was the only one left in the neighborhood. A chill ran down my spine. Had they all backed off, or was something bigger happening? I walked down the street, trying to understand what was going on. That's when I saw Mrs. Patterson sitting on her porch, looking out at the empty road. She didn't look at me, but I knew she was watching. The quiet spoke volumes. I could see the fear in her eyes, but it wasn't just fear. It was something deeper. It was regret. She knew I was right, but I could feel her holding back. I walked over to her. "Mrs. Patterson, do you know what's going on?" She glanced up, her face a mix of uncertainty and worry. "I don't know, Mark. But it's happening. The HOA. They've got everyone scared." I looked around again, trying to see any sign of life in the neighborhood. Nothing. It was like everyone had disappeared. "I can't keep doing this alone," I said, my voice low. She sighed, her hands resting on her lap. "It's not just you, Mark. They've been controlling this place for years. If we stand up, they'll crush us. You know that, right?" I nodded slowly. I knew she was right, but I wasn't backing down. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that empty street, the silent rebellion hanging in the air like a dark cloud. I was playing a dangerous game, and I knew it. But what was my option? To let the HOA keep pushing everyone around? To let them take whatever they wanted? I knew what I had to do. The following morning, I started gathering the neighbors. I didn't care about the HOA's threats anymore. I didn't care about their rules. I was going to fight for this neighborhood, and I needed to get others to see it too. I knocked on doors, talked to people in their yards, and tried to convince them that now was the time to act. Some of them were still too scared to say anything. Some told me they were just waiting for it all to blow over. But there were a few who stood with me. Just a few, but it was enough, and I could see it in their eyes. They were ready to fight. But just as we were making plans, just as we thought we were gaining some ground, the HOA hit us with their next move. It came in the form of a letter, delivered to every house in the neighborhood. It was a notice for a community meeting. The subject? Enforcing the new road regulations. It was clear what they were doing. They were trying to rally the neighborhood behind them. They wanted to make this a community issue. They wanted to make sure we were all on their side. But what they didn't realize was that this wasn't just about a road anymore. This was about something bigger. This was about power. I met with the small group of neighbors who had stood with me. We discussed our options, weighed the risks, and prepared for the meeting. But there was one thing I knew for sure. We couldn't let Mrs. Hardy win. We had to show up, and we had to make our voices heard. We had to make sure the HOA knew that we weren't just going to roll over. The day of the meeting arrived, and I felt the weight of it all. I walked into the community center where the meeting was being held, and the room was packed. There were people from every corner of the neighborhood. Some I recognized, some I didn't. And in the front of the room, sitting behind a podium, was Mrs. Hardy, smiling like a cat who had just caught a mouse. Her smile was cold, calculating. She knew exactly what she was doing. But so did I. As the meeting started, she began her usual spiel, talking about safety, neighborhood improvements, and community rules. She painted herself as the hero, as the one who was looking out for everyone's best interests. But I wasn't buying it. I stood up in the back of the room, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the power of the truth on my side. I raised my hand, and when she called on me, I didn't hold back. "I've read the bylaws, Mrs. Hardy," I said, my voice steady. "I know what you've done. You've been changing the rules without asking anyone, without anyone's consent. And now you want to take more?" The room fell silent. I could see Mrs. Hardy's smile falter for just a moment, but she quickly recovered. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone was waiting, but no one knew what would happen next. The silence in the room after I spoke felt like 1,000 eyes burning into me. Mrs. Hardy stood frozen, her smile now gone, replaced with a tight, controlled expression. For the first time, she looked vulnerable, but only for a second. Then, just like that, the smile came back, though it was thinner, colder. She cleared her throat, the noise cutting through the tension. "Let's not jump to conclusions here," she said, her voice smooth, but I could hear the edge. "This is a community issue, and we're all just trying to make sure the neighborhood is well managed." It sounded rehearsed, like she'd said it 1,000 times before. But something about the way she said it made me realize something. She was getting desperate. She wasn't the confident, untouchable president she used to be. She was losing control. I stood there, my heart pounding. I could feel everyone's eyes on me now. Most people were still too afraid to say anything, but I knew I had their attention. I had to keep pushing. "I'm not here to argue about safety or improvements," I said, my voice steady. "I'm here because the road you took doesn't belong to you. And the way you've been changing the rules, it's not right." The room went completely still, except for the sound of Mrs. Hardy's heavy breathing. For a moment, I thought she might lash out, but she held herself back. There were murmurs now. I could see it in their faces, the hesitation, the doubt. For the first time, I could see cracks in the facade of the HOA. It wasn't just me pushing back. It was the people around me, too. They were starting to question everything. Mrs. Hardy didn't waste any time. She quickly shifted the focus back to the meeting, dismissing my comment with a wave of her hand. "Let's move on, everyone," she said, her tone almost too cheerful. But I could tell she was rattled, and that made me feel even more certain that we were on the right path. I left the meeting feeling like I had taken the first step in a long, hard battle. But I wasn't naive enough to think the HOA was going to back down so easily. No, Mrs. Hardy would come for me. And I knew she'd come for anyone who stood with me. The next day, the HOA sent out another letter. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was an ultimatum. They accused me of stirring up trouble, of disrupting the peaceful environment of the neighborhood. They demanded that I retract my statement and apologize publicly at the next meeting, or face legal action. It was a clear threat. And for a moment I considered backing down. But then I remembered the looks on the faces of those neighbors who were starting to wake up. The ones who were finally seeing the truth. I threw the letter away, not even bothering to read the rest. I wasn't going to apologize. Not now, not ever. The HOA was wrong, and they knew it. The only way they could keep their grip on this neighborhood was by silencing anyone who dared to speak out. But I wasn't going to let that happen. The following week, I started talking to more neighbors, ones who had been quiet, unsure of which side to take. It was harder than I thought. Some people were too afraid to act. Others were still loyal to the HOA, convinced that Mrs. Hardy knew best. But there were a few who had started to see what was really going on. I spent hours talking to them, convincing them that we couldn't let the HOA keep taking whatever they wanted. And as I did, I saw something in their eyes, something that had been missing for a long time. It was hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, we could take back control. By the end of the week, we had a small group. It wasn't much, but it was something. We started meeting in secret, planning our next move. We were careful not to let Mrs. Hardy find out, because I knew the moment she did, the gloves would come off. But then something unexpected happened. I was walking to my car when I noticed something strange. One of the cars parked on the street had a sticker on it. It was one of those HOA compliance stickers, the ones they put on cars that violate their rules. I looked closer and saw that it wasn't just any sticker. It was a warning for a violation that didn't even exist. The car was parked legally, but the sticker was there, like the HOA was trying to make an example of someone. It was an intimidation tactic, and it hit me hard. That night, I called a meeting with the group. We had to act, and we had to act fast. The HOA was escalating thin. They were trying to break us down with small, petty actions like putting fake violations on cars, sending out endless fines, making us feel like we were constantly under threat. But that was their mistake, because all it was doing was uniting us. The next morning, I made a plan. We would go public. Not in the way Mrs. Hardy expected. We wouldn't just show up at the next meeting and talk. No, we were going to show them the power of the people. We were going to make sure every single person in the neighborhood knew what the HOA was really doing. We started small, posting flyers, talking to people on the street, leaving the HOA documents in places where everyone could see them. We were careful, but we were relentless. The message was clear. The HOA was breaking the rules, and we weren't going to let them get away with it. As the days passed, I could feel the momentum building. It was slow, but I could tell the tide was turning. More people were waking up, and more people were willing to stand with us. The HOA's grip on the neighborhood was slipping, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. But I knew we were far from winning. Mrs. Hardy would come after us harder than ever. She wasn't going to let us take away her power without a fight. And that fight was coming. But when it did, we'd be ready. It felt like we were teetering on the edge of something huge, something I couldn't quite grasp. Every time I thought we were getting closer to breaking through, something would happen to make me second-guess everything. We had a small group now, about a dozen of us, but the way things were escalating, it felt like we were outnumbered. The HOA wasn't just a collection of people anymore. It was a force. Mrs. Hardy wasn't just a petty president. She was a master manipulator, using every tool at her disposal to keep everyone under her thumb. She'd let us make our little moves, let us spread the word. But she was waiting. I could feel it. She was waiting for us to slip up. And I had no doubt she was planning something. Something big. I'd spent the last few days speaking with everyone, trying to get as many people on our side as possible. The more I talked, the more I realized how deep this went. Neighbors who had lived here for decades were scared. They had seen Mrs. Hardy's wrath firsthand. One neighbor, Mr. Larson, told me that the last person who fought back was forced to sell their house at a loss. "She'll do anything to get her way," he said quietly. "And once you're on her radar, you're finished." But there was something in his eyes when he said that. Something that told me he was afraid. But he wasn't ready to back down just yet. The air in the neighborhood had changed. It wasn't just the silent tension anymore. People were talking, whispering, gathering in small groups. There was a sense of power in the air, a shift. And as much as I was terrified of what was coming, I couldn't ignore the energy that was building. The HOA had made a mistake. They underestimated the people they thought they controlled. Mrs. Hardy hadn't been as visible recently. She was like a shadow, watching us from behind the curtains, waiting. It made me uneasy, but at the same time, it gave me hope. If she wasn't directly interfering, maybe she was planning something big, something that would expose her for what she truly was. Maybe this wasn't the calm before the storm. Maybe it was the storm itself, gathering momentum before it hit. The weekend arrived, and the small group we had was ready. We had made flyers, we had collected all the documents we needed, and we were prepared for the meeting. But we weren't going to just attend this time. No. We were going to make sure that everyone, every single person in this neighborhood, knew the truth. We had evidence, we had facts, and most importantly, we had a plan. We were going to expose the HOA for what it truly was. But as we were getting ready to distribute the final batch of flyers, something unexpected happened. A car pulled up in front of my house, and I recognized it immediately, Mrs. Hardy's car. She had parked right in front, and for a moment I froze. Was she here to confront me? Was she finally making her move? I stood still, watching her get out of the car. She was walking slowly, deliberately, like she had all the time in the world. When she reached my door, she didn't knock. Instead, she just stood there for a moment looking around as if she was taking everything in. Then she turned and walked up the steps to my porch. I opened the door slowly, but I wasn't sure what to expect. I thought she might yell at me, threaten me, or maybe even try to buy me off with some offer I couldn't refuse. But what she said caught me completely off guard. "Mark," she said, her voice calm, almost friendly. "I know you've been spreading rumors about the HOA, about me. But if you just stop now, we can all move on. No one has to get hurt." I stared at her, trying to understand what she was offering. Was this some kind of trick? A deal? I wasn't sure, but I didn't trust her. Not after everything she had done. I shook my head, stepping back from the door. "I'm not going to stop, Mrs. Hardy. Not now. Not ever." Her eyes narrowed, just for a second. But then, she gave me that same smile, the one that made my skin crawl. "I'm giving you a chance," she said, her voice quieter now, more dangerous. "But if you don't take it, if you keep fighting me, I promise you won't like what happens next." And just like that, she turned around and walked back to her car. No threats, no outbursts, just calm, controlled, terrifying. She was making her move now, but I didn't know what it was. What had she planned? I stood there on my porch, feeling the weight of what just happened. What had she meant? What was she going to do? I couldn't stop thinking about it. She hadn't seemed angry, just calculating, like she was setting up a trap, and I was the bait. That evening, I met with the group again. We had to figure out what our next move would be. I told them about the conversation with Mrs. Hardy. Everyone was silent for a moment, taking it in. "Mark, do you think she's going to try something drastic?" It was Mrs. Patterson, her voice shaky but clear. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm sure of one thing. She's planning something, and whatever it is, it won't be good for us." We couldn't back down now. We had come too far, and we couldn't let Mrs. Hardy win. But with her threats hanging over us, I started to feel like we were walking into the lion's den. Whatever came next, we had to be ready. The days following Mrs. Hardy's threat were nothing short of nerve-wracking. I could feel the weight of her words hanging over me like a storm cloud, dark and foreboding. I knew she wasn't done with me, and with every passing minute, I could feel her tightening her grip on the neighborhood. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. but I knew that whatever came next would change everything. The tension in the neighborhood was thick, like the air before a thunderstorm. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that would either break us or push us over the edge. The group and I met regularly, planning our next move, but we were careful not to give too much away. We didn't want to give Mrs. Hardy the chance to strike first. But then it happened. The morning of the HOA's scheduled emergency meeting, I woke up to something that made my heart race. It was a simple letter, tucked under my door, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. The HOA had filed a lawsuit against me. The charges? Harassment, defamation, and interference with HOA operations. I stared at the paper in disbelief, the words blurring in front of my eyes. This wasn't just a petty move anymore. This was serious. Mrs. Hardy was using everything she had to shut me down. The lawsuit wasn't just about me. It was about sending a message to anyone else who might be thinking of standing up to her. But this was war. And I wasn't going to back down. I called an emergency meeting with the group that evening. We all knew what was at stake now. It wasn't just about the road. It wasn't even just about the HOA's control. It was about our right to stand up for ourselves, to fight back against a system that was trying to crush us. We can't let her do this, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and determination. We have the truth on our side. We have the law on our side, and we're not backing down. The room was silent for a moment, but then, one by one, people started to nod. They were with me, and I knew that no matter what happened next, we were going to make sure our voices were heard. The next morning, we all showed up at the HOA meeting, but this time, things were different. This time, we weren't just going to sit quietly and listen to Mrs. Hardy's lies. We were going to expose her for what she was. As I walked into the community center, I saw the usual crowd of residents, all sitting in their usual spots, too afraid to speak up. And then there was Mrs. Hardy, standing at the front, her usual smug grin plastered on her face. But I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew we weren't going to let this slide. The meeting began, and Mrs. Hardy started right where she always did, talking about safety and neighborhood improvements. But today, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest, and raised my hand. "I've seen enough," I said, my voice cutting through the air. "Enough of the lies, enough of the manipulation. It's time we all knew the truth about what's really been going on here." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. Mrs. Hardy's smile faltered, but she didn't stop me. She was nervous. I started by presenting the evidence we had gathered, the HOA's illegal changes to the neighborhood bylaws, the falsified violations, the manipulation of power. I could feel the room shift. People were starting to pay attention, but Mrs. Hardy wasn't going to give up that easily. She interrupted me, trying to dismiss everything I said as inaccurate or false. But I didn't back down. I kept speaking, louder and clearer, until the truth was out in the open. And then came the twist. Just as I thought we had won, the doors to the meeting room burst open. 2 uniformed officers walked in, and I froze. For a moment, I thought it was over. Had Mrs. Hardy really gone so far as to call the cops on us? But no, it wasn't the police. It was a lawyer representing the HOA who had come to present new evidence. She stood in front of us, holding a large stack of papers. She pointed at me. "Mr. Mark," she said, her voice sharp, "you are accused of multiple violations of community trust. The HOA has filed an injunction against you, and we demand immediate removal of any statements you've made about the board." The shockwave hit me like a punch to the gut. They were using everything they had, but I wasn't going to back down. I took a deep breath and stood up. "Are you really going to sit there and let them control your lives like this?" I turned to the room, making eye contact with every person who had been silently watching. I'm not here to tear this place apart. I'm here to fix it. We deserve better than this. We deserve a community where we aren't afraid to speak out, where we aren't punished for standing up for what's right. The room went still. And then something amazing happened. One person stood up, then another, then another. It was like a chain reaction. One person's bravery ignited the fire in everyone else. They were standing up for themselves, for their homes, for their rights. M.